It took me a long time to understand something crucial about life. People will only respect the boundaries that you enforce. For years, I let others push my limits, invade my personal space, and take advantage of my kindness. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was giving them permission to do so by not standing firm in my values and expectations. If you've ever felt like people constantly overstep your boundaries, whether it's at work, in relationships, or with friends, you're not alone. We all want to be liked, to be agreeable, to avoid conflict. But in doing so, we often compromise our own well-being. That's where Stoic philosophy comes in. The Stoics believed that true strength and confidence come from within, and they practiced habits that helped them maintain control over their lives, regardless of external pressures. Today, I'm going to share 9 Stoic habits that have helped me stop people from disrespecting my boundaries. These habits aren't about being harsh or cold. They're about standing firm in who you are, protecting your peace, and commanding the respect you deserve. If you're tired of feeling like your boundaries are constantly being crossed, these Stoic habits will help you regain control and live life on your own terms. Let's dive in. Habit 1. Master the art of saying no. One of the most powerful habits I've learned from Stoicism is the ability to say no without guilt or hesitation. For years, I was a people pleaser. I thought that in order to maintain relationships, I had to always be available, always say yes, and always put others before myself. But that mindset left me exhausted, resentful, and most of all, disrespected. People who knew I wouldn't say no started taking advantage of my time and energy. In Stoic philosophy, the idea of focusing on what's within your control is central. One thing that's always within your control is your time and your attention. When you constantly say yes to others, you're essentially giving away pieces of yourself. You allow people to determine how your time is spent, leaving very little for your own needs, goals, and mental well-being. The Stoics, especially Marcus Aurelius, emphasized the importance of guarding your time as your most precious asset, and one of the simplest ways to do that is by mastering the word no. Saying no doesn't mean you're selfish. It means you respect yourself enough to prioritize your own needs and limits. When you set this boundary, people may resist at first. They may even try to guilt you into changing your mind. But over time, they'll come to realize that your time is valuable and that you won't allow anyone to take advantage of it. I found that the more comfortable I became with saying no, the more respect I gained from others. It wasn't because I was being harsh or unreasonable. It was because I was being clear about what I would and wouldn't accept. The key is to practice saying no firmly but kindly. There's no need to explain or justify yourself. A simple, "I'm not available for that right now," or "that doesn't work for me," is enough. The more you do it, the more empowered you'll feel, and the less people will try to push your boundaries. In fact, I've noticed that once people see you're willing to say no, they stop asking for unreasonable favors in the first place. They learn to respect your limits because you respect them yourself. Habit 2. Be clear and direct with your expectations. Another Stoic habit that has helped me tremendously in protecting my boundaries is being clear and direct about my expectations. For a long time, I assumed that people would just know what I needed or where my boundaries were. I thought they would naturally respect my time, my space, or my emotional needs. But here's the truth. Most people aren't mind readers. If you don't clearly communicate your boundaries, you can't expect others to respect them. The Stoics believed in living according to reason, and part of that means being direct and transparent in your communication. When you set a boundary, it's not enough to hope that people will pick up on it through hints or subtle cues. You need to make your expectations crystal clear. This can be uncomfortable at first, especially if you're not used to speaking up for yourself. But the more you practice, the more natural it becomes. I remember a time when I struggled with a colleague who constantly interrupted me during meetings. I would get frustrated, but I never said anything. I assumed they should just know it was rude. But of course, nothing changed until I decided to address it directly. One day, I calmly but firmly told them, "I'd appreciate it if you could let me finish my thoughts before jumping in." It was a simple statement, but it made all the difference. From that point on, they stopped interrupting me. Being clear about your boundaries isn't just about preventing disrespect. It's about setting the standard for how you want to be treated. It's about showing others that you value yourself enough to protect your space, your time, and your energy. Once people know what your boundaries are, they're far less likely to cross them. And if they do, you'll be in a much stronger position to enforce them. Stoicism teaches us to act with purpose and clarity, and this applies to how we communicate with others. Don't assume people know your limits. Tell them. Be direct, be firm, and most importantly, be consistent. When you do, you'll find that people start treating you with the respect you've always deserved. Habit 3. Detach from the need for approval. One of the biggest obstacles to setting and maintaining boundaries is the fear of disapproval. For years, I was caught in the trap of trying to make everyone happy, afraid that if I set firm boundaries, people would think I was selfish, rude, or unkind. But here's what Stoicism teaches us. The opinions of others are beyond our control, and basing our self-worth on external validation is a surefire way to lose control of our lives. Epictetus famously said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." This Stoic principle is a game changer when it comes to boundary setting. The truth is, no matter how much you try to please others, someone will always disapprove of your choices. If you let that dictate your actions, you'll end up compromising your own well-being just to avoid conflict or discomfort. That's a path to resentment and burnout. By detaching from the need for approval, you reclaim control over your life. This doesn't mean you should be callous or indifferent to others. It means you should prioritize your own values and needs over the opinions of others. When you set a boundary and someone reacts negatively, remind yourself that their reaction is not within your control. What is within your control is how you enforce your boundaries and protect your well-being. I used to hesitate before setting boundaries, worried that people would be upset or think less of me. But the more I embraced Stoic detachment, the more I realized that I could not control their reactions. What I could control was my own sense of integrity and self-respect. And once I stopped caring about gaining approval, I noticed that people respected me more, not less. They may not always like your boundaries, but they will respect you for having them. This habit of detaching from approval has not only helped me maintain my boundaries, but it's also freed me from the constant anxiety of trying to manage how others perceive me. When you stop seeking validation from others, you start to build unshakable confidence in yourself. You begin to trust your own judgment, and that trust becomes the foundation for how you interact with the world. People sense that confidence and, in turn, are far less likely to try to push your boundaries. Habit 4. Stay calm in the face of pushback. One of the most challenging parts of setting boundaries is dealing with the inevitable pushback. People who are used to crossing your boundaries won't take kindly to the new rules you've set. They may try to argue, guilt trip, or manipulate you into changing your mind. But here's where Stoicism really shines. It teaches us to stay calm and composed, even in the face of adversity. The Stoics believed that emotions like anger and frustration come from within, not from external events. This means that when someone pushes against your boundaries, they aren't actually causing your frustration, you are. As Marcus Aurelius put it, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The ability to remain calm in the face of pushback is one of the most important habits you can cultivate to protect your boundaries. When I first started setting boundaries, I was often met with resistance. People would argue or try to guilt me into changing my stance, and I found myself getting defensive. But over time, I realized that my defensiveness was a sign that I wasn't fully confident in my boundaries. The more I practiced staying calm, the more I realized that I didn't need to justify or defend my decisions. My boundaries were valid simply because I set them. Now, when someone pushes back against a boundary I've set, I take a deep breath, remind myself that their reaction is not my responsibility, and calmly restate my boundary. This not only diffuses the situation, but also reinforces my authority over my own life. By staying calm, I send the message that my boundaries are firm and non-negotiable, no matter how much someone may try to push against them. One of the most valuable lessons I've learned from Stoicism is that true power lies in your ability to remain composed. When you react emotionally to pushback, you give away your power. But when you remain calm and centered, you maintain control over the situation, and more importantly, over yourself. Over time, people will learn that pushing your boundaries won't get a rise out of you, and they'll stop trying to do so. Habit 5. Enforce boundaries with consistency. Consistency is the backbone of boundary setting. One of the biggest mistakes I made early on was setting boundaries and then bending them when people pushed back. The result? They knew I wasn't serious. People will test your boundaries to see if they hold, and if you cave under pressure, they'll continue to push further each time. This is where Stoicism comes into play once again. Consistency in your actions reflects your integrity and self-discipline. Stoicism emphasizes the importance of living in alignment with your values, regardless of external circumstances. This applies directly to enforcing your boundaries. If your boundaries reflect your values, whether it's protecting your time, energy, or emotional well-being, then bending them for the sake of convenience or to avoid conflict undermines both your values and your self-respect. I used to feel guilty for sticking to my boundaries, especially when it seemed to inconvenience others. But I realized that inconsistency didn't just harm me, it confused the people around me too. When you're not clear and consistent with your boundaries, you send mixed signals. People don't know what to expect from you, and as a result, they're more likely to overstep. But when you're firm and consistent, people start to understand that your boundaries aren't flexible and they respect you for it. I remember a time when I set a boundary around my work hours. I didn't want to be contacted after a certain time, but I kept making exceptions, answering calls or emails late into the night. Naturally, people continued to push those boundaries because I had trained them to expect that I wasn't serious. It wasn't until I consistently enforced that boundary, ignoring non-urgent emails and letting calls go to voicemail, that the behavior stopped. Once people realized I wasn't budging, they adapted. Consistency also reinforces your own sense of self-respect. When you stick to your boundaries, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable, you're telling yourself that your needs and values matter. And over time, this builds confidence. The more you enforce your boundaries, the more you'll trust yourself to protect them, and that trust becomes a powerful force that others can sense. People are far less likely to disrespect your boundaries when they know you're serious about maintaining them. Habit 6. Practice emotional detachment. One of the most powerful Stoic habits for protecting your boundaries is emotional detachment, learning not to take things personally. This is easier said than done, especially when someone you care about crosses a line. But emotional detachment is about understanding that other people's actions are a reflection of them, not you. It's about creating a mental buffer between their behavior and your emotional response. The Stoics taught that we should only focus on what we can control, and other people's actions and reactions fall outside of that realm. You can't control whether someone respects your boundaries, but you can control how you respond to it. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop letting other people's actions dictate your emotional state. For a long time, I struggled with this. When someone crossed a boundary, I took it as a personal affront, feeling disrespected or undervalued. But Stoicism taught me to separate my self-worth from other people's behavior. Just because someone disrespects your boundary doesn't mean you're not worthy of respect. It means they haven't learned to respect themselves or others. Understanding this allows you to stay calm and rational in situations where your boundaries are crossed, rather than reacting out of hurt or frustration. Emotional detachment also helps you stay focused on the solution rather than the problem. When you're too emotionally invested, you're more likely to react impulsively, saying things in the heat of the moment that you might regret later. But when you practice detachment, you can respond with clarity and intention, enforcing your boundaries without letting the situation spiral out of control. One technique I've found helpful is to remind myself that people's actions are often driven by their own struggles, insecurities, or misunderstandings. When someone disrespects my boundaries, it's not about me, it's about them. This mindset shift allows me to stay grounded and respond from a place of strength, rather than reacting emotionally. By practicing emotional detachment, you can enforce your boundaries without feeling overwhelmed by guilt or anger. It allows you to maintain control over your emotions and, in doing so, assert your boundaries with confidence and clarity. When people see that they can't provoke an emotional reaction from you, they'll think twice before trying to overstep again. Habit 7. Embrace the power of no without guilt. Saying no is one of the simplest yet most difficult things to do, especially when you're used to being accommodating. But here's the thing, your boundaries mean nothing if you're not willing to enforce them with a firm no when necessary. In Stoicism, self-mastery is key, and part of mastering yourself means learning to say no without guilt, fear, or hesitation. This is one of the most important habits for stopping people from disrespecting your boundaries. For a long time, I had a habit of overcommitting because I didn't want to disappoint anyone. I thought saying yes all the time would make people like me more, but in reality, it just left me feeling stretched too thin and, ultimately, resentful. Worse, it sent the message that my time and energy were less valuable than everyone else's. People started expecting me to always be available, which led to even more boundary violations. Stoicism teaches us to focus on what we can control, and that includes our ability to protect our own time, energy, and resources. When you say yes to things that violate your boundaries, you're essentially giving up control of your own life. You're letting others dictate how you spend your time and where you invest your energy. The more you say yes out of obligation or fear of upsetting others, the more people will take advantage of your willingness to sacrifice yourself. The Stoic principle of apatheia, freedom from emotional disturbance, can be applied here. When you say no, do it without letting the fear of rejection or guilt cloud your decision. Practice emotional detachment from the outcome. Remember, you are not responsible for how others feel about your boundaries. If someone reacts poorly to you asserting your limits, that's on them, not you. You cannot control their emotions, only your response. The key is to be firm but respectful when saying no. You don't have to explain yourself or offer excuses. In fact, over-explaining often invites more pushback. A simple, "I'm not able to do that," or "that doesn't work for me," is enough. The more you practice this, the more confident you'll become in asserting your boundaries, and the easier it will be to say no without feeling guilty. One of the most liberating moments for me was when I finally stopped apologizing for saying no. I realized that I was constantly apologizing for protecting my own time, as if it was something shameful. But once I embraced the power of no, I felt a tremendous weight lift. People started respecting my time and boundaries more because I respected them first. Saying no doesn't make you selfish. It makes you strong, and it reinforces the idea that your time and energy are valuable. Stoicism reminds us that we are the gatekeepers of our own lives. If you don't want your boundaries to be disrespected, you must protect them, and that often starts with the word no. Habit 8. Prioritize your needs over pleasing others. One of the hardest habits to cultivate is learning to prioritize your own needs above the desire to please others. This is especially true if you're a naturally empathetic or caring person. But Stoicism teaches us that we must take responsibility for our own well-being, and part of that involves making sure our needs are met first before trying to cater to the demands of others. If you consistently put other people's needs ahead of your own, you'll find that your boundaries get trampled in the process. I used to be someone who would bend over backward to make sure everyone around me was happy. I'd say yes to every request, take on more work than I could handle, and put my own needs on the back burner because I didn't want to disappoint anyone. The problem was that by constantly putting others first, I was teaching people that my time, energy, and well-being were secondary. It wasn't long before I started to feel drained and disrespected. Stoicism teaches us to act with wisdom and discernment in all things, including our relationships. It's not selfish to prioritize your own well-being, it's necessary. Epictetus famously said, "Know first who you are, and then adorn yourself accordingly." In other words, understand what you need to thrive and build your life around that. If you consistently ignore your own needs in favor of others, you're not acting in alignment with your true self. Start by recognizing that your needs are just as important as anyone else's. Whether it's setting aside time for yourself, taking care of your mental or physical health, or saying no to commitments that overwhelm you, you have a right to protect your own peace. This doesn't mean you should become selfish or disregard the needs of others, but it does mean that you should never sacrifice your own well-being just to make someone else happy. When you make a habit of prioritizing your needs, you'll find that people respect you more. They'll see that you value yourself, and they'll be less likely to overstep your boundaries. It's a powerful way to assert control over your life, and it helps you maintain balance in your relationships. Remember, you can't pour from an empty cup. When you take care of yourself first, you'll have more to give to those who matter. Habit 9. Lead by example. The final habit to stop people from disrespecting your boundaries is to lead by example. Stoicism teaches us that we should embody the virtues we want to see in the world. If you want others to respect your boundaries, you need to show them what that looks like by respecting the boundaries of others. People tend to mirror the behaviors they observe, so when you treat others with respect, honor their limits, and communicate openly, you're setting a standard for how you expect to be treated in return. I used to think that setting boundaries was all about drawing hard lines and enforcing them with firmness, but Stoicism taught me that leading by example is one of the most powerful ways to influence others. If you consistently model respect, empathy, and clear communication in your interactions, others will take note and are more likely to reciprocate. This doesn't mean that everyone will automatically respect your boundaries, but it does create an environment where mutual respect is the norm, not the exception. One of the key Stoic principles is eupatheia, or healthy emotions. When we approach life with a calm and balanced mindset, we're better equipped to navigate relationships and handle conflicts. If you remain composed, firm, and respectful when asserting your boundaries, you're demonstrating emotional mastery. Others will see that you're serious about your boundaries, not through aggression or defensiveness, but through the quiet confidence of someone who knows their worth. Another aspect of leading by example is being consistent. If you set boundaries but constantly let them slide or make exceptions, people will assume that your limits aren't serious. Stoicism teaches us to act with integrity and consistency. If you say that your time is valuable, honor that by showing up for yourself as much as you show up for others. If you need time for yourself or want to avoid certain situations that drain you, don't compromise on that just to avoid conflict. The more consistent you are, the more others will respect your boundaries. Ultimately, leading by example is about embodying the values you hold dear. If you want respect, give respect. If you want clear communication, communicate clearly. When you live in alignment with these principles, you create an atmosphere where boundary violations are less likely to occur, and when they do, you're prepared to handle them with stoic calm and confidence.